Welcome to Grace Abounds. I'm Pastor Emily Baton. Today, I will be sharing with you my Sunday sermons from St. John's Lutheran Church in Palm Desert, California. Thank you for joining us, and may you find grace, peace, and comfort in the message today. Well, let's dive right into this gospel, shall we? There were some Sadducees gathered when they came up with a question. Wait, let's pause for a second. Do we know who the Sadducees are? No? All right, let me tell you. Now, we often see the Sadducees paired with the Pharisees, as they function similarly. Well-educated on the sacred texts, working to enforce purity codes. However, there are a couple distinctions between these sects. For example, the Sadducees were more concerned with maintaining the purity of the temple, as well as their own status in it. They kept among the wealthy and high up in society. Very distinctly, and most likely the reason they are singled out in our gospel, they did not believe in the resurrection. Okay, so we have a grasp on who the Sadducees were. Let's get back to our gospel. Some Sadducees were engaged in conversation with Jesus when they asked him about a hypothetical scenario. One in which a woman loses her husband, and so his brother marries her, but then he also dies, and so the next brother marries her, and so on, and so on, and so forth. So who will be her husband in the resurrection? Jesus is ready to respond. Okay, wait, I need to pause one more time. Why are the Sadducees asking this overcomplicated question in the first place? Bringing out a rule where there's an obligation to marry the brother's widow, so she's protected, the land stays with the family, and so does the name. Then they take this a step farther to ask, who is she married to in the resurrection? But the Sadducees don't even believe in the resurrection, so why do they care? Probably because they don't really care about getting an answer from Jesus. They'll do anything to try and undermine Jesus' authority and preserve their own power. So they try to trap him. Now Jesus responds, knowing it's a trap. Jesus stands before the Sadducees and answers their question by unraveling its original premise. Their question assumes that the resurrection is a copy of the current reality and will have its same institutions. Jesus opens the door to a broader understanding of the resurrection. What if, when we see God, the rules and regulations don't apply anymore? What if our obligations and parameters are irrelevant? What if the natural order was to be upended and transcend our human categorizations? What if God, who makes and unmakes this world, destroys and recreates our expectations? Have you ever experienced a moment like that, when you are broken and yet made new all at once? I have. And I was reminded of it recently when I was teaching confirmation class. The confirmands were asking me questions. Everything from why do we go to church to what color they think my hair should be dyed. The answer was blue, by the way, in case you're wondering. I don't think I'll be following that advice, but But there were two questions at the end that particularly caught my attention. The first, when did you decide to become a pastor? And the second, was there a time you doubted your faith? I was struck by them because the answer was the same the time I read Job. I was on a mission trip with my youth group, and my youth director, in his infinite wisdom, decided to make the theme of the week questions and spend the whole time reading from the book of Job. Now, I don't know how many of you have spent the time to read Job all the way through, but it is a challenging read, even for adults. Not to mention teenagers just starting to explore their faith. There are a lot of hard things to wrestle with in Job. God allowing Job's life to fall apart, Job's friends berating him for what he must have done to incur the judgment of God, and Job's cries for vindication in his innocence. Just listen to the excerpt from our reading. For I know that my vindicator lives, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, then in my flesh I shall see God. You may know this line also as, for I know that my Redeemer lives. As Anne Marsh writes in her commentary on this passage, Job's entire self is being dismantled by this unjust persecution and by the painful realization that God either is not hearing him or is not a trustworthy judge. And this is what reading Job did to me. I was questioning everything I knew about God and myself. How could God allow Job's suffering? Where is God in the tragedies of this world? Where is God when I am left alone and in pain? I found myself in worship, not being able to stand and sing the words I knew so well. But that is not the end of my story, and neither is it the end of Job's. On the last day of the trip, we read God's response to Job. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. God goes on to describe creation, the Leviathan, the forming of the mountains and its creatures, the great acts of God. And honestly, I was a bit underwhelmed by the overwhelming imagery. After all, I had waited a week for this. Mostly, I was confused and a bit frustrated. I imagine much like the Sadducees were by Jesus' answer, because the Lord's answer, just like Jesus, unravels the question itself. So I sat in worship, dejected, surrounded by people, and yet completely alone. And that's when I began to feel a presence, a familiar one that rushed over me. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. What is truly remarkable about God? The Lord answered. And it felt like mighty arms surrounding me, grounding me in all that I was, am, and would become. I could doubt, I could question, and be assured that I was enough because I was a part of God's great act of creation. And so I stood back up and sang, "Your love never fails. It never gives up. It never runs out on me." It was in that moment that I said yes to a call that terrified me, a call that would lead me to places unknown, knowing that I would never be alone in it, a call to ministry. And so, years later, when a group of confirmands asked me if I had ever doubted my faith, I told them this story. The very reason that I sat before them, the very reason that I stand here in front of you, so that they would not fear or be ashamed of doubting, to remind myself and them that God will always answer. For how could God be absent from the very world God created? How could your actions dismantle a relationship knit together by God at existence's very beginning? Do I question? Sure I do. Do I worry what tomorrow brings? Yes. Do I wonder what the resurrection looks like? Absolutely. But I do not wonder if I shall see God, if we shall see God. In that, we already have the answer. Amen. Thank you for listening. Each week's episode is edited by Nick Cox with music by St. John's Worship Band. This week's sermon is by me, Pastor Emily Baton. Make sure to subscribe, and if you would like to know more about St. John's mission to know Christ and make Christ known, please visit our website at stjohnslutheran.church. May God be with you this day.